welcome to Science Minds. I'm joined today by Aubyn Stahmer, so I'm very excited to have you here.
Thanks, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so let's just jump into it. My first question, I'm just kind of interested to hear about your trajectory and how you sort of got involved with autism and developmental disabilities, and just kind of hear a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I have a really weird first experience with autism where I read this book in junior high called A Circle of Children by Mary McCracken. And she was a special education teacher, sort of on accident, and she had this child in her class who no one could understand what he said. And this is in the olden days when they had a thing called a tape recorder. And so she was tape recording the class and it was warped. And so it slowed down and she could understand what the kid was saying. I don't know if this is true, but this was her story. And it was an autistic student in her class. And it was just so interesting to me. So in junior high, I started thinking about autism and that it was interesting. And so I majored in psychology at CU Boulder. And in Denver, Sally Rogers was doing autism research. And so I did like an undergraduate research assistant summer in her lab, and that is where I started learning about autism. And so it was really cool that now I get to work with her as a grown-up. But I first heard about it in junior high. Of course, at that time, no one knew what autism was. And then I got really interested in parents and how we could help parents support their kids, and did work with Laura Schreibman at UC San Diego. That's where I did my graduate work. And we did a great deal of work in making interventions a little easier for parents to use. Back then it was all super structured and not very fun for families. And so it's been great to try to make things more fun for families. And I think that's how I got to implementation science, where, well, my first faculty position, we were just talking about this, was in upstate New York. It was very cold there. So I took a clinical job at Children's Hospital in San Diego and back to UCSD because it's nice there. And that's how I got involved in implementation science, because we were trying to make these programs we'd been doing in research work in the hospital.
I'm interested, something you said is, taking kind of intervention science and making it applicable and fun for parents. And I'm kind of interested in sort of the steps between kind of ABA therapy, which is obviously like very structured, very evidence-based, but how do you kind of make those steps from the sort of evidence-based stuff to be applicable to parents and fun for parents and usable in their kind of everyday lives?
My soapbox for a minute is the ABA is a science, not a treatment. So it's the science of applied behavior analysis, and it can be used in multiple ways for multiple things. So historically, one of the first autism treatments shown to work was a really structured form of ABA called discrete trial teaching that many people continue to use. But there are lots of newer forms of ABA that are more natural, that incorporate developmental science and are child and family centered and are done in people's daily lives and the way kids interact and play. And that's how we made it more fun, is we got more and more interactive, more and more natural, and more like kids usually learn, and less like so caught up in the trial, I think. And really understanding that just because you're autistic doesn't mean you have to do the same thing 20 times in a row to learn.
Right.
That structuring things a little bit more, but it can still be fun and playful and interesting.
Yeah. And you've kind of been in this intervention world for a while and sort of seen the ebbs and
I'm
flows.
old.
Definitely not. But I'm kind of interested, it seems like at this point in time, there is a lot of kind of backlash and negativity around applied behavior science. And I'm kind of interested to hear, you kind of alluded to it in your last answer, but just kind of hear about how do you reconcile sort of the science of applied behavior analysis or applied behavior science with sort of how the public perceives it currently, and how, people within, especially like the neurodiversity movement, are approaching it and thinking about it as well?
Yeah, it's a really different way for me to think about things, because it was 30 years ago that I came into the field, and the idea was most people diagnosed with autism or kids diagnosed with autism had also intellectual disability and a lot of challenges with communication. And now we're able to learn more from autistic people. So I also think that many autistic people who had ABA when they were younger, it was highly structured, not very child-centered, and focused on getting rid of their autistic traits that they're very proud of and are necessary and are part of neurodiversity and not something to be gotten rid of. And so it is taking providers a time to learn that, is taking families a time to learn that, and hopefully we are. And I think the shift in interventions is helpful for that. It's important for kids to learn and important for us as adults to respect how kids learn. And I think if we do that for autistic toddlers in the same way we do it for typical toddlers, there's limits, but also we're respecting their personality and their diversity in all kinds of ways, including neurodiversity. The data are pretty clear that if we are following kids' interests, we're giving them choices, we're working within activities they want to do, they're learning just as well, if not better, than they do when we're being really adult directed and forcing them to do things they don't want to do. And so I think it's really a matter of providers learning how to listen and do what kids need. The data are clear that the interventions work just as well.
Changing the subject a little bit, it's been really great having all these amazing scientists on this podcast, and the theme that runs through, like, to do really good science, collaboration is very important. And it's really interesting to just hear about how others have sort of structured collaborations throughout their careers. But diving into your literature a little bit before this episode, you, to me at least, from my perspective, have a really, really broad web of collaborations. I would say more collaborations sort of outside of, it was harder for me to track how you,
it would be fun to draw a picture.
Kind of overlap with all of these people, but you do have this really broad, kind of extensive web of collaborations. And I'd just love to hear if that's something that has been purposeful in your career, and if so, how have you sort of structured that, and how has it developed over time?
Yeah, it's super purposeful, and I only collaborate with nice people. It's a huge, smart and nice. It's a strict rule, but it came about because we were trying to move evidence-based practices into the community, and we needed to learn from the community. So all the work, 90% of the work I do is community partnered. So that leads to a lot of collaborations, because you need autistic people, you need parents, you need providers, you need funders, you need administrators, all on the team to figure out if an intervention is going to work. And then if you're doing that kind of implementation work, you need a lot of participants, because you lose, statistically, you lose power, right? And so then you need collaborators all over the country in order to test these kind of group. If you're testing something at the level of the school instead of the student, you need a lot of schools to do that. And so that leads to needing a lot of collaborators. And we just learn so much more when we're doing things in different parts of the country, because systems are different, and what people want is different, and how funding is structured is different. And so if the goal is to get practices that work into the community, you have to learn all of that. And so that's why there are so many collaborations. That's interesting. I didn't thought of it as more than usual. But each collaboration also has a community team that is an integral part of the research. And so it leads to a lot of people being involved. But I think it makes things better, because remember, they're all smart and nice.
Yeah, that's one thing I noticed, is there was a lot of really smart people in those, on those author lists, and doing just really cool team science and intervention. When you get all this information about the differences, the communities, like community level differences, how does that inform how you continue to develop and morph your work? How does that impact you?
we have to change what we're doing a lot of the time, because usually the evidence-based practice is either too complex or too intense or actually not applicable. So we were doing this school-based project with an evidence-based practice, and the teachers, we were like, why aren't you doing this one component? You never do it. And they're like, well, it's not developmentally appropriate for the kids in my class. And we were like, oh. So we went back in the lab and we tested that, and they were absolutely right. Of course they're not doing it, and it's because it's not appropriate, and they know that and we don't. So we changed the protocol, so that's an example at the provider level. A lot of times it's how much can you do with the funding. So if you can only if a funder's only going to pay for 12 weeks of parent coaching, then your intervention better work in 12 weeks. And we've been successful with our partnerships at kind of changing that, like working with the funder to say, well, what if it's a family who does 12 weeks, but they need follow-up or something like that? And since we're willing to work, they're willing to work. And then, yeah, so it's changed the structure. It's changed the key components. It's taught us about what we really need to teach people and don't. And then just thinking about how we do training, how we do professional development, and what works in terms of funding and supervision in different settings is really different too.
Yeah. All right. Here's kind of an off-the-wall question, but if somebody, not me, because I have no money, but if somebody, the NIH or a funding agency, snapped their fingers and doubled your budget overnight, what are some things that you would want to, like, your kind of top of the list things you'd like to add into the work that you do or interventions that you're working on that you think would add a lot of value to people?
So many things. I think that with implementation science, the hardest part is that it takes a lot of setup, right? So to implement a practice well in a school, for example, or an early intervention program, you need leaders on board. They need to set up systems. There needs to be training. And the way funding works, it's in these short periods. And so we have to train the leader, train the provider, and measure the child outcomes like within 6 months. So the teacher's learning, and we're trying to understand if it's working. So I would spread everything out, like at least double the length, so that we could give people the prep time they need to be successful. And then it would really tell us if the intervention is working or if the training we're doing with leaders is working, rather than just trying to jump in and test it in a short period of time. More money, more time. Yeah. We would do just what we're doing, only more and longer.
Yeah, that's awesome. So off the science topic, I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of who you are outside of research and outside of academia, kind of your hobbies, what you like to do.
Gosh. Well, I like to ride my bike a lot. So I do that pretty much every weekend, which is a great way to be outside, and is a great part of Sacramento is that we have this amazing bike path that goes along the river for 40 miles. And then I like to hike. And I especially got into hiking during the pandemic because it's outside. You could do it. I could leave my house. And we have Tahoe really close by, and we have the Bay Area and beautiful beach hikes very close by. So that's mostly what I do when I am not here. Go outside.
Yeah. Good place to be.
Yes.
For sure. Finally, kind of looking toward the future, what excites you about the field of autism and intervention science right now, and what do you sort of look forward to in the next 5 to 10 years?
I'm really excited about the focus on community partnerships right now. When we started our first community partnership. We've got one that's been going for almost 20 years. And at that time, it was people were not even thinking you should listen to human beings in the community. And now you have to. It's part of almost every grant call. And I'm excited about how quickly and successfully we can move things forward now that researchers are listening to the people who need the intervention. I think it's going to make a huge difference. And so that's what I'm very most excited about. And I'm excited for researchers to grow up in a time when they're getting their training at a time when community partnership is important, so they don't have to relearn how to talk to people once they're established. And so I'm hoping that becomes like a part of every graduate program, from intervention science to basic science, because all of it should be informed by the community. And I think that's one of the biggest shifts I've seen in my career. And then the neurodiversity movement's really exciting, and how we're adapting interventions, because that's my work, and thinking about how, I guess it's part of community partnered, but thinking about how we can improve people's quality of life and the way they learn without affecting who they are. I think that's really exciting.
That's awesome. Well, it's a great place to end. I really appreciate chatting with you, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. That was fun.
Excellent.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was founded in 1998 with the promise to reduce and prevent the disabilities that can be associated with autism and other neurodevelopmental conditions. Every day, our clinicians and researchers make progress on that promise. Our groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other conditions associated with disability are helping affected individuals achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website or our social media platforms to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.